The Crusades, the ugliest religious war in history. Part 2, the final corruption. Welcome back to the darkest chapter in medieval history. In Part 1, we witnessed how Pope Urban II's call for holy war devolved into cannibalism at Antioch, massacre at Jerusalem, and ultimately, strategic stalemate. We saw noble intentions corrupted by greed, faith twisted into fanaticism, the dream of reclaiming the Holy Land drowned in blood. But if you thought those early crusades represented the depths of human depravity, you were wrong. What came next would make the horrors of the First Crusade look almost noble by comparison. This is the story of how the Fourth Crusade became the greatest betrayal in medieval history, and how the Children's Crusade revealed the ultimate corruption of a movement that began with prayers and ended in slavery. Chapter 1. The Pope Who Lost Control. The year was 1198. A new pope sat upon the throne of St. Peter. Innocent III was young, brilliant, and utterly convinced of his own divine authority. At just 37 years old, he claimed dominion over not just a church, but all of Christendom, kings and emperors included. Jerusalem had been in Muslim hands for over a decade since Saladin's reconquest, and Innocent burned with ambition to succeed where others had failed. He would launch the Fourth Crusade, and this time there would be no mistakes. But Innocent would discover what every leader learns too late. Once you unleash the forces of war and greed, you cannot control where they lead. His call echoed across Europe with familiar promises: complete forgiveness of sins, eternal glory, and the chance to serve God. But this time, the great kings were busy. No Richard the Lionheart. No Frederick Barbarossa. Instead, the nobles of France took up the cross. Men like Boniface of Montferrat, Baldwin of Flanders, and Geoffrey of Villehardouin. Ambitious, proud, and deeply in debt. That debt would prove to be the Crusade's original sin. Chapter 2. The Merchant Prince's Bargain. The Crusaders needed ships. And there was only one power in the Mediterranean that could provide what they needed: the Republic of Venice. Enter Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice. 90 years old, nearly blind, and absolutely ruthless. When the Crusaders came begging for transport, Dandolo saw not a holy mission, but a business opportunity. His price was staggering: 85,000 silver marks, enough to fund a small kingdom for years. The Crusaders agreed, believing they could raise the money through donations and the sale of property. They were wrong. When the Crusaders gathered in Venice in 1202, they were nearly bankrupt. Dandolo was not a forgiving creditor. The Crusaders found themselves stranded, hungry, and desperate. Then Dandolo made them an offer that would damn them all. Chapter 3. The First Betrayal. Zara. Help us capture the city of Zara. Dandolo said, and your debt will be forgiven. There was one problem. Zara was a Christian city. Its people worshipped the same God, prayed to the same Christ, and looked to the same Pope. Attacking Zara wasn't crusade. It was a sin. The Crusaders wrote to Pope Innocent, begging for guidance. His answer was clear: do not attack fellow Christians. I forbid it absolutely under pain of excommunication. But the warning arrived too late. Or perhaps they simply ignored it. In November 1202, the Crusader fleet laid siege to Zara. Crosses hung from its battlements. Messages pleaded for mercy. We are Christians like you, the citizens cried. We serve the same God. The Crusaders answered with fire and steel. Zara fell in 5 days. Churches were looted. Civilians were murdered. The city's wealth was divided between the Venetians and their allies. The Pope excommunicated the entire crusade, though he would later lift the ban for all except the Venetians. Christian blood was now acceptable currency in a holy war. But Zara was just the beginning. Chapter 4. The Prince's Impossible Promise. While the Crusaders counted their spoils, a young man arrived with a new offer. Alexios IV, son of a deposed Byzantine emperor, promised them everything. Help me reclaim my father's throne, he said, and I will give you 200,000 silver marks, 10,000 soldiers, and reunite the Eastern Church with Rome. It was a fantasy. The Byzantine Empire was broke and torn by civil war, but the Crusaders wanted to believe, because belief was easier than facing the truth. They had already betrayed the very cause they claimed to serve. Enrico Dandolo saw the opportunity immediately. Venice had old grievances with Byzantium. Here was his chance to settle them. In June 1203, the Crusader fleet sailed toward the greatest Christian city in the world. Chapter 5, Constantinople, the Queen of Cities. Constantinople was a marvel. For 8 centuries, it had been the heart of Christendom, wealthier than Rome, more populated than Paris. Its walls had never been breached. Its churches held treasures beyond measure. The citizens of Constantinople watched the Crusaders arrive with confusion and fear. Why were these supposed allies drawing their swords? The Crusaders claimed to support Alexios' right to rule, but what they saw before them was not a mission. It was temptation. In July 1203, the Crusaders attacked. The reigning emperor fled. Alexios was crowned. For a moment, it looked like the gamble had paid off, but then reality returned. Chapter 6, the promise that couldn't be kept. Alexios tried to fulfill his promises. He melted down church treasures. He taxed a population already in poverty. He strained an empire already broken. He had promised 200,000 silver marks. He had promised troops from an exhausted nation. He had even promised to heal the great schism between Eastern and Western Christianity. But the people of Constantinople had had enough. In January 1204, Alexios was overthrown. A new emperor rose with a simple message to Crusaders: leave or be destroyed. The Crusaders now face a choice: return home in failure, or do the unthinkable. They chose the unthinkable. Chapter 7, the Sack of Constantinople. On April 13, 1204, the Crusaders stormed Constantinople, using their ships as siege towers. They broke through the sea walls and poured into the city. What followed was not a battle. It was a crime against civilization. Men, women, children, priests and nuns, all were murdered. The Hagia Sophia was desecrated. A prostitute was placed on the patriarch's throne. Holy relics were stolen. Libraries were burned. Art was destroyed. The wisdom of centuries turned to ash. The Crusaders killed Christians with the same fury they had once reserved for Muslims. Chapter 8, the rape of the Queen of Cities. For 3 days, Constantinople was torn apart. The Crusaders looted the city street by street. Sacred relics vanished. Gold and silver were stolen. Women and children were raped and enslaved. A Byzantine witness, Nicetas Coniates, wrote that even the Saracens showed more mercy. The Crusaders divided their plunder. Venice claimed its share. The nobles took theirs. The common soldiers fought over what remained. When it ended, the greatest Christian city in the world was in ruins, and it had been destroyed by Christians. Chapter 9, the Latin Empire, a kingdom of shame. The Crusaders created their own kingdom from the ashes. The Latin Empire, Constantinople, ruled by Baldwin of Flanders. It was a kingdom built on theft and doomed from the start. The Latin Empire lasted barely 60 years. The Byzantines would eventually reclaim their city, but the damage was done. The Eastern Christian world was permanently weakened. The door was open to future conquests. The Pope, once outraged, later praised the so-called reunion of Christianity under Rome. The corruption was complete. Chapter 10, the Children's Crusade, Innocence Betrayed. In 1212, a new tragedy unfolded. A 12-year-old French boy named Stephen claimed that Christ had appeared to him. He said that children would succeed where adults had failed. Thousands of children answered his call. They believed the sea would part. They believed their innocence would protect them. They were wrong. At the coast, merchants promised them passage. They were names like Hugh the Iron and William the Pig. The children boarded ships believing they were bound for Jerusalem. They were bound for slavery. 2 ships were wrecked in storms. Hundreds of children drowned. The rest were sold in the markets of North Africa. Boys were castrated. Girls were sent to harems. The Pope responded with a decree banning child crusaders. But the damage had already been done. Chapter 11, the later Crusades, a movement in decay. The 5th to 8th Crusades repeated the pattern. Failure without purpose. The 5th Crusade failed in Egypt. The 6th was a diplomatic success, but condemned by the Church. The 7th saw King Louis of France captured. The 8th ended with his death from disease. By the 13th century, the Crusades had become a scam. Indulgences were sold. Expeditions were funded but never launched. The Knights Templar became bankers, not soldiers. The crusading ideal was dead. Chapter 12. The Fall of Acre, the End of the Dream. On May 18, 1291, the last Crusader stronghold fell. Acre, the last Christian city in the Holy Land, was captured by Mamluk forces. The Knights Templar made their final stand in a crumbling tower. With Acre gone, the Crusades were over. Jerusalem remained Muslim. The Eastern Church was shattered. Hundreds of thousands were dead. And the Byzantine Empire was permanently weakened. The Crusades had not saved Christianity. They had nearly destroyed it. Chapter 13. The Reckoning, Legacy of Shame. The Crusades began with Pope Urban's promise to serve God. They ended with the enslavement of children, the sack of Christian cities, and the triumph of greed over faith. They exposed the darkest sides of religious zeal, violence, hatred, and moral corruption. Most damning of all, they revealed how good intentions are no defense against evil when mixed with power and pride. When Western armies returned to the Middle East centuries later, the memory of the Crusades still burned. The massacres, the betrayals, the false promises, they were not forgotten. Closing, the question that remains. 200 years of war, hundreds of thousands dead, civilizations destroyed, children sold into slavery, the greatest Christian city in the world, reduced to rubble by Christians themselves. This is the legacy of the Crusades, a movement that began with prayer and ended in horror, a lesson, even now, about how belief can be twisted, how certainty can blind, how good people can become monsters in pursuit of a holy cause. The Crusaders believed they served God. History shows where such certainty leads. The question they leave us with is not whether religious conflict will return, but whether we are willing to learn from the past before we repeat it. That may be the only redemption the Crusades have left to offer, the chance to do better than those who came before. End of Part 2. Thank you for listening. This was Hugh from World History Marathon. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit that like button.